Guys, I'm Jeremy Beeland, New Hampshire home buyers, coastal Florida home buyers, but most importantly, REI Freedom. This guy, I don't know which side of the camera he is of you, but that is Steve Richards. He is my business coach. I've been coaching with him for almost a year now. He has been a game changer professionally for me, one of the best coach, if not the best coach I've ever had. This guy has 25 years of experience in business, 20 years of business experience in real estate alone. This guy has done a lot of deals. He's run RIAs. He's in millions or a bunch of masterminds. He's connected with some of the biggest and best players in this country, and he's doing amazing things. And we have the privilege, the luxury to share him with you because he's just this go-giver of a person. And Steve, thank you for being here today. And I can't wait to share everybody with your knowledge. We have new people here today, Steve, that haven't seen you before. So this is awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was looking at the names. I don't know most of the people in here, so I'm excited. I know a few, but when you said about being in a bunch of different masterminds, I thought you were going to say that I've spent millions of dollars on masterminds, and I was going to say it's actually not wrong.
I spent a lot of money too.
Training, master over 25 years, it's easy to do. Actually, it's not easy to do. It's hard to do.
Yeah, it's hard to do. But wait, listen, when you've been around for 20 years, that adds up pretty fast.
100%. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that, and by the way, guys, if you can start putting questions in the Q&A, probably be good. I can riff on some things. I'd love it to be more Q&A tonight. But Jeremy, I think you and I talk about all kinds of stuff all the time, but usually most people know a lot of what they need to, the info. In fact, many times they have more than the info they need, and that's probably a lot of the reason. So I think probably one of the better things we can do tonight is try to cut through the shit and help with some perspective, not just like tactics, but like, I think knowing what to do is good, but sometimes knowing what not to do, and are you on the right path, and just getting belief in what you're doing so you can double down on it, and instead of being like, well, I'm trying this, like marketing is so hard not to do that. It's so hard to stick to it and believe in it and not doubt it. And one of the reasons is there's so many other things I think we'll talk about today that, by the way, any great training I've ever done is always a bait and switch on the title. We're going to tell you what you wanted to hear, and then we're going to give you what you needed to hear. But no, I'm kidding. We'll definitely dive into that. But, it's interesting. One of the things I want to talk about is in the middle between the front end marketing and the back end dispo. Here's one thing. I'm not going to make it all about this tonight, even though this is where I think most of the focus should be. I've seen this happen so many times, and this will be a good thing to kind of start with, like prefacing. 90% of your effort gets put into marketing and your exit strategy. You're like, oh, I got to do novations. I got to do lease options. I'm going to use hard money. I'm going to flip the house, or I got to do this marketing or that marketing, or I don't know what's going on. And so like all this effort, and there is a time when that's important, but once we get over the hump of like decent, basically if you have people calling you who own a house and they have any level of situation, meaning not everyone's just like calling a realtor is probably the smart move for them. Any level of situational or distress, and they actually own the house and they're willing to talk to you, that's good enough. Like once you can get 10, 15, 20 of those calling you a month, a minimum, you're cooking with gas, because you can, if it's like, oh, I got 5 or 6 this month and 1 next month, and then I didn't get any, I got busy in my day job, and then I did a big marketing campaign, like 100 people called me, but 80 of them didn't even own the house because it was some weird Facebook thing I did, whatever. But once you get into where consistently you can get 5, 10 leads a week, and they're, for the most part, the people actually own a house, we're getting over the initial hump.
And Steve, we should probably just preface a lead is like, guys, so, a lead is just basically anybody that raises their hand and said, I may or may not be interested in selling my house now or in the future. Doesn't mean like, hey, I got your thing in the, your letter in the mail, ready to sell right away. Maybe something like, I got your letter in the mail, maybe I'm interested. So anybody who just says, other than don't take me off your list, or take me off your list, and, or, screw you, I sold the house, or something nasty, that's pretty much a lead.
Yeah, even if they sold their house. If they're like, yeah, I just sold it, they're not technically a lead, but you got to hold the right person.
Yeah.
Actually,
Right.
you got a hold of a really good person because they
Yeah.
just sold. Like you actually got a hold of someone who was going to sell their house. You just did it
Just a
too
little
late.
late.
So although I don't count those as leads, but in our campaign, which could happen if you buy a foreclosure list that's old,
Happens a
that's the
lot.
kind of thing that can happen if you, or a tax sale and you start calling everyone after the tax sale date. Like, oh yeah, I sold my house, I sold my house, I sold my house. Well, you had the right list, you had bad timing.
Right.
But I just wanted to preface, I agree with you. Basically, if they own a house and they're willing to talk to you about the idea of selling, and that house is in an area that you expected to talk to somebody, like it's not across the country or whatever, because sometimes you do pay per click and
Yeah, you never know
right,
where
and you
it's
don't
gonna land up.
understand yeah, if you don't
Yeah.
understand geofencing, like you'll get leads from all over the country in these weird rural areas. But my point is, if it's the kind of property that you could be willing to buy because it's in the right area, the right type of property, they own the place, they're actually the owner or they represent the owner, and they're just willing to talk to you. To your point,
That's the
they may
lead.
not sell. That's a lead. Now, we'll get into this later about marketing because I think the back end of marketing, like trying to digest whether or not your marketing is good enough quality, is important. But what I was going to say is, I know you had this conversation several times. Once you get over that initial hump of marketing and you've closed a handful of deals on the back, like some kind of like you've done an ovation or two, you've done 3 or 4 assignments, you've got in and done a renovation and got the house listed and sold. If you've gone through that or seen the ball go through the hoop a couple times with an exit strategy, and you got over the hump where every month you have like at least some level of consistency coming in, whether or not you think they're good quality or not, at this point, 80 or 90% of your focus should not be on marketing and the dispositions at this point.
Right.
It's just a healthy, like 50%, half of your, because the other half of your, 25% on marketing, 25% on your exit strategy, the other half of your focus, once you get over those humps, like I've done a few exit strategies, so I know how it works, or of this exit strategy, and I got consistent lead flow, even if it's a low lead flow. But at that point, it's really easy to get focused on those and keep your focus on them and not realize that you're just not really good at qualifying a lead. You're not good at beating an objection. You're not good at booking an appointment. You're not good at negotiating price. You're not good at getting a contract. You're not good at figuring out how to solve problems. You're not good at title work. You're not like, there's so much ground to be gained in there. I just want to at least allude to that tonight because we're going to talk about the front and the back end.
Yeah.
But I don't want you guys to think that's what's most important because it's all equally important. It's literally, it's like 25% on marketing, 25% on sales, 25% on operations, 25 and transaction coordinating, 25% on exit strategy. Roughly. I mean, it's a little
Yeah.
like up and up.
Well, I'll give a plug. So for you guys who want to get better at the stuff in the middle, that's where REI Freedom comes in, right? So you can generate leads, you can generate, dispo strategies, and we can help you with that. But taking the leads and converting them to deals, there's a lot of stuff that goes in between. Listen, there's a lot just to get a deal, one of those leads under contract. It's even more to get it to closing. So there's a lot of stuff in between for sure, Steve.
Well, 100%. Yeah. And you don't even have to, I mean, I wouldn't even call it like any kind of weird plug. I mean, that's literally what you're doing here.
Right.
And it's just like me saying, like, hey, well, I guess I could coach somebody. Like shit. After all these years, if I don't know how to give people advice, like I'm just there.
Touche.
I couldn't have been. I mean, and it's my personality to be able to process things. One of my gifts is be able to convert knowledge into wisdom.
Right.
And so I started out tonight by saying, like, most of you guys already know most of the shit you need to know, and maybe too much. But
That's a good point.
until you take action and gain experience, your knowledge starts to convert into expertise. It's the experience mixed in with the knowledge creates expertise. The expertise gives you the confidence to start to do some things. And then once you've done it enough, you raise your awareness. And you guys all know, like, awareness is different than just like believing this thing works. Like like personally for me coaching, I coach nearly almost just exclusively people that are in the low 7-figure trying to ramp up to the mid or high 7 figures because I've found that almost anyone under $1 million, there's a few exceptions. It depends on the business, but in real estate, they're not beyond that faith. They're still like using faith to get over the belief that this is going to work, which means they have a bunch of doubt.
Yeah.
Doubting this, they're doubting that. They're not, so they don't have the ability to commit. And part of that, a guy like you and what everyone on the call with marketing and dispositions, like at a really high level before we get in the weeds, is the being willing to know you're going to make it happen. Like you have the awareness that there's thousands of people around the country doing deals every day.
There is. Yep.
And so, and when you sit in groups like Boardroom where we met and things like that, like you just see shit and you're like, all right, I can't unsee it. I can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like I know now I just need to take committed action. And as long as I'm willing to track everything that's going on, I can always like reverse engineer back from what's going wrong
100%.
to find whatever caused or allowed the issue, and I fix it, and now I'm getting better.
Yep.
There is no failing, it's just quitting, And I would say that, when we talk about marketing, that's probably the very first thing that we should address is just and we can get in the weeds about it because I do want to give them some very tactical information, but
Good.
when you agree it's just being committed and being willing to like make it work is one of the
because it ebbs and flows, and sometimes, there's certain areas that doesn't work as well as other. We've obviously been in different markets, so we've seen certain marketing channels work better and outperform other marketing channels in different markets. It's really weird. And when things are a little slow or things don't work, it's really easy to say, well, let's pull the plug and go with another marketing channel and another marketing channel. And I've been guilty of this, where I've basically done everything and really haven't seen things to fruition. And, thanks to you, we deep dived a lot of our marketing for the last 5 years up in our New Hampshire business. And it's just been 3 marketing channels that have been like 80-90% of everything we've done. They've been super steady. And we always question them, while all the other ones we've tried never really work. It's just been 3 basic ones that outperformed everything. And they've been very consistent for us. And one of them is, believe it or not, is old-fashioned direct mail. That thing has
always.
performed for 7 years, going on almost 8 years for us up here in New Hampshire.
Well, count me in for 20 years of it because I'm serious. It's the first one we ever used.
Mail's dead, man.
It's the first one we ever used. And yeah, it's really, really powerful. And what's interesting, what are the other 2 channels, by the way, just so people can hear them?
SEO, which took us a few years, obviously, to invest, to ramp up. So that's a long game, just so you guys know. You can't just plug in SEO and expect it to work. It takes quite a few years, really, to get it going. And PPC. Those have been our top 3 performers over the years.
Yeah, I would definitely, not to, because those are the 3 for you, but I'll contradict one thing you said for most people on. They're not going to put the time, money, and effort into SEO.
Correct.
I would not have that in your top 6 or 7 for most people because it takes commitment.
It does.
And
it took us years.
There's a lot of fraud out there. I mean, there's literally just most of the people you pay to do SEO for you, it's not really worth it. Like you really got to work with someone that knows what they're doing. And when you get in the SEO game, you got to realize, and guys, if you don't know what SEO is, search engine optimization, you're basically trying to create organic content so you don't have to pay for the ads, but you're paying to, trust me, you're spending money. It's just not paid ads.
Yes.
It's just, it's curated over time. And what's hard is the amount of content and SEO game that all the big boys have, that Homebesters and, I mean, every trust, every REIT that's out there doing business that's buying publicly. Now they've been a little quiet for a year, almost 2 years.
Why?
but they can ramp that game up a lot faster than most people.
Yeah, for sure.
Pay-per-click's a little difficult too. I would just give you guys, if you're considering pay-per-click, I know one thing I would say, Jeremy, is to work with a provider who's building out your actual marketing account, like your ads account, so that they're not building an ads account and then technically they're just selling you leads. And if you fire them, everything's gone.
Yes.
That's a big thing with PPC. There's a lot of PPC providers. No, they're not pay per lead. It's not really what they're doing, but they're setting up on their web domain. They're setting up, they own the code for the website.
Right.
They're setting things up on your behalf and they control it. So just make sure you know who has access And when you get away from working with that vendor, who's going to own the ad account? Who owns the code? Who owns the website? Right.
Yeah, and I would only add this, and correct me if you feel differently, but I feel like PPC is an expensive marketing channel. So if you're relatively new or novice in this business, I wouldn't recommend it. I feel like once you get to the point where you're generating leads pretty consistently, you've been doing quite a few deals, and you're really starting to hone in your acquisition skills and your lead conversions ability, then PPC is great because you don't want to be learning on the PPC budget because those leads could be $200, $300, $400, $500, $600 up here in the Northeast. So you can spend $6,000 on 10 leads, and if you're not converting them, you're just you're wasting all your money. So I recommend those for people who are a little bit more seasoned and polished.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that what you just gave them are the best lead sources when you're committed and you have the budget and you're willing to stick to it. And by stick to it, I would stick to direct mail for, 90 days is barely enough
Correct.
because it just takes a few weeks for it to get going and then for them to call in and then to get on contract. And then most of you guys are going to take somewhere between, I would say 30 on the low end, but I doubt most people are there. Most people are 45 to 75, maybe even 90 days to get a deal done.
Yep.
I see a lot of guys with a contract and they renew the contract and they can't get it sold and then they renegotiate price and it took them going to the house and then calling them back 2 weeks later and then going back out to the house and now the lead's been in their system for a month before they even get a contract. And then 2 or 3 weeks goes by before they even get marketing the contract because they're trying to get title ordered. And there's just so much crap that can happen that literally it takes, 1 to 3 weeks to get mail even out. That's once you got to get a proof done and you got to get them to send the mail and then depend on what you pay for in mail. But I think because we're trying to dive into the front and the back end of the business today, it's worth saying, the other thing with mail is not only do you need to give it 3 and really 6 months minimum. So think about this. If you're going to drop, say, 5 to 10 grand, any more these days, if you don't drop 5 grand, that might buy you around 10,000 postcards. Right? I'll just do some quick math for you guys. The quick math is if you get 1% response rate these days, it's really good.
Yeah. I think 0.008 is about national average at this point.
Yeah. So if you got of 1/4%, depending on what market you're in, that's not bad. If you're in a more competitive market, it could be less than that.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. So I'm just doing some math on my phone here. So we dropped 10,000. And if I get on 10,000 mailers, I get 1/3 of 1 point response rate. Right? That's 33 calls.
Yeah.
I'm going to maybe take these 33 times 0.67 because about 1/3 of those aren't going to be qualified. At least they're going to be taking me off your list. Right? We're down to 22. Right? And then you're going to try to book an appointment. If you're good at it, you're going to book an appointment with 80% of them. If you're good at holding the appointments, you're going to hold 85% of the ones you booked to actually get on the phone or get to the house. That's 15. I doubt you're going to offer on all of them, just to be honest. If you do, you're probably cramming offers down people's throat when they're not ready, because not everybody's ready for an offer. But let's say you have 75% of the people you offer on. So we're down to 10, well, 11. And let's say you're pretty good at it and you get 20% of your offers accepted. That's pretty good. Right?
I'd say so. Yeah, for sure.
If you're running in person, you might get you might get 25 to 30% if you're good, really good with decent leads like pay-per-click, whatever. If you're running cold calling leads and you're buying over the phone and you're remote wholesaling in a market you're not in and you're kind of new at the business, shit, you're going to get nowhere near that. You might get 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 accepted, like 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
So that's 2.2 contracts. And then depending on how good you are at the exit strategy, you're going to have the national average is at least 50% of contracts fall out.
Yep.
Quite frankly, if we take people that are in their first year or two in the business,
much higher.
yeah, again, if you're remote wholesaling in a market you don't live in,
Much
and
higher.
you're buying over the phone
Yeah.
and
Much
you're
higher.
selling over the phone. So let's say it's only 50% followed. That's 1.1 contracts, right?
Yeah.
Now here's the other big kicker. And I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, like cold, wet blanket here, but I'm just providing some reality for you guys that, so now I'm down to closing like a little over one deal out of that.
Yep.
Which wouldn't be bad to have a $5,000 deal cost as long as I make 20 to 30,000 or more.
Correct. Yep.
The problem is, to do that, you probably need to be selling $150 to $300,000 house or more, depending on what market you're in.
Good point.
Because if you guys are wholesaling, this is a little nugget that a lot of people don't get for a long time. You should be making about 15% on the price you're selling the house for, not ARV.
Right.
If you can get 20+%, you're a kick-ass wholesaler. So what I mean by that is, if you're selling $100,000 house, ARV might be 200. It might need 20, 30 grand of work. You're selling it at 100. Someone's going to put 30 in it, and they can list it for 200 or whatever. So in that scenario, 100,000 is your assignment price, or your B2C, your back end closing. It's your resale price. If you're not making at least 15 grand on that, if you're especially if you're down at 10% or less, you're just basically earning what a realtor would earn.
Yep.
Really, what that means is you're not really providing any value, because that's what they would have paid a realtor to show up and stick a sign in the yard.
Yep.
And I've owned brokerages for years, so I'm not talking shit about realtors to anyone who's on here
No
but
offense, Mike DeCandia.
but especially with the recent NAR lawsuit, brokerage stuff's about to get real, because buyer's agents can't just ride on the teat of all the listing agents who find the deals, and then all they do is show up and write an offer and they get half the money, right? So it's going to be interesting. But my point is so if you're not really providing more value than a realtor, what are you doing? If it's a really easy, pretty house, okay, Jeremy, you probably make less money on those, right? Like, you're willing to make 5 to 10% on a house. Like, if it's an easy, clean house and the people move out and there's no work needed, and you pass it through and you make 5, 10 grand or 15 grand or whatever. I would do that on a pretty house as long as there's no crap to deal with. But the problem is that people calling us usually have crap to deal with. Like, the house is distressed, so there's got to be the buyer's getting a budget, and they're doing inspections, and they're negotiating repair costs, and then the owner can't move because they can't afford it. So you're trying to negotiate post-closing possession and all these things, right? And so when you start to get into providing value to the owner above and beyond price, if all I'm giving them is a sale price, that's what a realtor does.
Yep.
So if I'm not like helping them sell a house that's a piece of shit, or helping them solve a problem, like giving them a down payment to move into the nursing home, or whatever the case is, then I'm okay, I guess, with earning less money. But you just can't spend as much money to get these deals. So when you spend money, it's usually to dig through and to get the better deals that have distress, where you can make more money. So you just got to realize, when you don't make more than 10%, you're going to throw your return on marketing dollars off. And if whatever you guys are spending on marketing, if you're not getting at least 3 times that back, and to run a healthy business, you want to be at 4 to 6 times or more. But if you're not getting 3 times back, you're probably going to lose money. Would you agree, Jeremy?
Yeah, and I see it, and it can be easily achieved, because your acquisition costs can get really expensive, especially if you have low conversion, and then if you have low, revenue or disposition revenue coming out of it, you can sometimes be losing money. You don't even realize it.
Yeah, because you can spend 5 grand on a marketing campaign and then turn around and sell a house for 5 grand 2 times. Or I
Yep.
mean, sell a house and make 10. You think you made 5 grand,
You
but
really
you
do.
put all the time in.
Yeah. And
Like,
you
you
may
did.
have people that you're working with too that you have to pay, like an assistant, and there's then your CRM and other costs that you may do. Yeah, for sure. That's why it's really important that you get your skills good to provide a lot of value. And if you provide a lot of value, not only are you going to get bigger spreads, but as rather than separate yourself from a realtor, but you're also going to have less cancellations because those people are going to need your value much more than they just need to sell the house. So, to get from 50, 60% cancellation as a realtor, just making it on price, which is what you should never do, get it to 30, 40%. And that doesn't seem like a big difference, but that 10 to 20% would be a huge amount at the end of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if that deal took 2 months, if you spent the money and it took a month to get the deal and get the lead in and get the contract, a month to sell it, you just made if you don't count anything else, if you actually got $5,000, you made 2,500, you got a $30,000 a year job.
I'm quitting my job tomorrow.
You make more at McDonald's than 30 grand a year. I mean, seriously, it's $19 an hour at McDonald's, and if you work 2,000 hours, I mean, you're making 40 grand. Like, you're making more money. So like, we can't do that.
No.
So the marketing matters, definitely. But what matters even more is how you handle things. And I think perspective, like I said, was a big key for tonight. Going into it, if you're struggling on how to price things, it's just really easy to look at and be like, well, I'm selling this thing at this price. I know I got to make 15, at least 10, but more like 15+% on whatever I'm selling it for. Is anyone willing to pay that? Right. And so I don't want to get into all the pricing, everything today, but like, a lot of times you get the price you go in looking for.
I like that. Yep.
Don't you agree?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, you don't know any better and you go get it on contract at 50 grand too high, and they're acting like it's the end of the world. And then later you're like, holy shit, I put this on contract $50,000 too high. I'm never going to do this deal. And then lo and behold, you call the seller back and they're like, well, what am I supposed to do? And you're like, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And they're like, well, what can we do? And then lo and behold, it doesn't happen often where it's that big of a spread, but when you see it happen enough, you believe in it, that all of a sudden they agree to take $40,000 less than when they acted like they couldn't take a penny less 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And they just went down 40 grand and you closed the deal and you thought you were going to make 20 and you made 10. But then the reality is you could have got it at that price or better from the very beginning.
For sure. And now, can I share one experience here? So when we were out in New York and when we had Western New York home buyers there for a while, we had a relatively new acquisition guy, and he was doing a really good job. He's getting a lot of deals, but his average was only about 10 to 30. I want to say it was like 10 to 13K, somewhere in there. It was really small. So as a company, if you're paying an acquisition guy and you're spending marketing, you're only getting 10 to 13K an assignment, you're not making any money. And we talked to him and said, dude, we need to be like 20 to 25 consistently. And we talked a little bit, and like a light bulb went off one day, and all of a sudden he's just like, it was just a limited mindset. He changed his mindset. And just like that, the next day he started getting contracts, and all of a sudden we went from like, let's just say 13 to 25, and he stayed there for a year just because of mindset. That's all it was. No marketing difference, no skills difference. It was just his belief that he could actually do it. And those are where houses are only average about $50,000, $60,000 for an ARV.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah. I literally can remember driving in my car. I remember driving in because I was going to a meeting with my business partner and I was listening to this podcast. This guy who's he hasn't been in the business for 10, at least 10, 12 years, maybe 15 years now. But he was a guy that I had met and he was starting to get kind of like famous like you, Jeremy. Starting to do internet, being a guru.
Make me blush.
But he was literally a guy who was successful, started coaching, started getting involved in more social media and things. It really wasn't social media at the time. It was actually just podcasts, because this was like even before social media was big. But he literally told that story. He's like, listen, everyone thought I was crazy. I was doing 20 deals a month, making $5,000, and I was making $100,000 a month. And this is like back when the best of the best did 7 figures.
Right.
I mean, I was like looked at as a pretty successful wholesaler at the time, and we're doing 50 grand months, 60 grand months, but we were probably spending 10.
Right.
Just, so we're making, 5, 6 times. But it's interesting that, and we were flipping houses too and stuff. But anyway, like rehabbing. But anyway, I was listening to this guy and he's like, man, everyone thought I was crazy. And And I literally didn't change anything. I just came into my team and I said, hey, we're no longer doing a deal for less than 15 grand and we're shooting for 20,000. And he'd been doing all these $5,000 and $10,000 deals. And 3 of his 4 acquisition guys quit, but the one who didn't, they lost their ass for 2 months.
Yep.
And because he was spending, 20, 30 grand a month of marketing and all his
Sure.
deals fell apart. And so he just lost money for a couple months. But then he resurfaced 2, 3 months later. He came back and they didn't change any of their marketing. They didn't change anything else, just their mindset. And he was crushing and he was doing 5 deals a month instead of 20. And he was making 20 grand on 5 deals instead of making 5 grand on 20
much
deals.
less
And he
work,
cut his
too.
marketing.
Yeah.
He cut his marketing by 2/3.
Yeah. That's proof, guys. Less is more. And I will tell you this, one of my coaches, Todd Toback, back in the day, this was years ago. He's like, dude, if you're making $5,000 an assignment deal, you will not have a business that will survive. You will go out of business. I argue today that if you're doing 10,000 or less, you're probably going to go out of business. It's not sustainable because marketing costs are expensive now compared to when I started. So with that being said, guys, you need to have the mindset of doing 10,000 plus. And really, it's not that much. We are doing 30, 40, $50,000 deals. And again, I told you guys, we're doing $25,000 deals when houses were ARVs of $60,000. So they're there. So don't have that limited mindset. It's something we all struggle with, but that can prevent you from making a lot of money in this business.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I want to address this question real quick. Michael had a question. He said, when you're pulling lists to send a direct mail, what parameters are you pulling? Absentee owners ? So, Mike, I'll give my 2 cents and then you can dive in, Jeremy. So at a high level, there's these general demographic things you guys want to look at. And the 2 main, in my opinion, are people who are older and they've lived in their home for a while. And so if you're 40 years old and you bought your house last year, there's almost zero chance you're selling it.
Yep.
If you're over 55, because that's when your kids start to graduate from high school, by the way, traditionally, if you're over 55 and you lived in your house for at least 7 to 10 years, you're actually way more likely to be selling that house in the next 6 months to 12 months. Now, you could also do things like, if you are over 65 and you have a 2-story house, because people don't like stairs. I mean, there's all these like variations of this demographic, but I call this aged equity. And it's aged obviously because the people are getting to a phase in life where it's just normal to sell your house. Usually you're buying your first decent, like, real house when you're like 30-ish.
Sure.
And then you're married for like 5 or 6 years and have a kid, and then your second kid comes along and you go buy this like upgrade, second home, maybe when you're around 40, late 30s or 40. And then sometime in the next 5 or 10 years, you wind up in maybe like the more dream home. And then when the kids are, in high school, you put the pool in, whatever. And then by 55 or 60, like, you're starting to think about transitioning. So that's one, I would say, demographic thing, like how long they've lived in the house in combination with how old they are. That is a really, really deadly combination. It's been my best demographic, like, stack, I'll call it, where I stack 2 things on top of each other over all the years. Second to that would be absentee homeowners is another demographic breakdown. And I'd be looking for anyone who's owned the rental property for over 2 years. And if you want to go 5 years, this is a weird time, but a lot of times, the way rental properties, just about 30 to 33% of all properties in the country, guys, are free and clear.
It's crazy.
But yeah, which is all properties, but absentee owners at a much higher rate are free and clear on their property. Also, they don't have the emotional distress of having lived in it and feeling, energetically or emotionally tied to the house for some reason, and they don't have to move to sell it. And so if they've owned it for 5 years or more, usually a lot of investors have to put down at least 25% to get a loan. So they typically have more equity to start with. Many times they pay cash or use an IRA or something. So they just have more equity. They don't have to. My point is, the aged people, just being 55 or 60 doesn't makes you a little more likely to sell. But when it's that and you've lived in the house for 7 to 10 years, right? So they have to take that time to earn the equity. Because if they're 65 years old and you bought the house last year, you might have only put 5 or 10% down. You might not really be able to sell it, right? Differently though, with the absentee owners, you don't have to really wait for that equity to build. So as long as they've owned it for a couple of years, it's probably okay. But for 5, it should be better. What I really like is when you're watching markets up and down, just little nuances in it. But when you can go to offer somebody more than they paid for it and it still works really well for them when markets are going up, I love working with absentee owners because this is a little negotiating nugget. So if I talk to a guy and he says, "Hey, I bought this house, 5 years ago for 100 grand and I've been renting it for, $900 a month." If I know in my head it's about $400 of expenses or whatever, whether he has a loan or not, I don't even care. But I know he's netting 500. He's making 6 grand a year net, right? So I'm just making numbers up, by the way. But let's say he's making 6 grand a year and he's owned it for 5 years. That's 30 grand he's made on it. Bought it for 100. Let's say like comps now are like 135, and he bought it at full price. But I might be able to come in and be like, unless they're really savvy, it's just easier to come into that person, especially if they're out of state and they're a little clueless on the market, to come in and be like, "Hey man, I can give you 110 for this place." Like if it's still in good shape, right? And now it's probably renting for 1,200 or whatever. But the point is when you negotiate with them, they're already at a less emotional standpoint. They're less emotionally tied. They don't have vested equity from like sweat equity from living in the house. Now they might if they're like a landlord who bought it and fixed it up themselves and all that, but those are more like one-off people, right? Secondly, they put more money down. They paid cash or put 25% down. So they're starting with more equity. If the market's gone up at all, it's nice because now you're still offering them something that seems really reasonable. But when they're trying to talk to you, you're like, and you back talk them, well, tell me what it rents for. And they don't really mind telling you all that. But then when you're like, well, hey, haven't you already netted 30 grand on the house? Now, if they're really smart, they're going to be like, yeah, I had to get a return on my money. But it's like, well, yeah, if they're like, well, I got to get my cost basis out of this thing. And you're like, well, what is your cost basis? Like, did you depreciate it? Oh shit, you did. So actually you got a bunch of tax savings and you made 30 grand minimum on rents. And so it's just, so my point is, I don't want to get too any more in the weeds in that, but like, it is an extremely different negotiating tactic to work with a landlord.
Yeah. Yeah.
They start with more equity. Go ahead.
No, I agree. I would say, those were two of our best performers in up here in the Northeast for a long, long time. I will say, once the interest rates spiked up, last year or going into the last year for us personally, we saw a huge decrease in the 65 plus, right? The senior citizens selling. Like they have always been like a majority of the people that we bought houses from over the years, but they could no longer afford to sell the house and downsize. So they've been trapped by the interest rate in their homes, despite the deferred maintenance. So, that has been a list that had performed very poorly for us last year. And absentee around here, it's like some years it's great, some years it's not, some years it's great. It's up and down. It's very highly competitive because it's not just mostly wholesalers and house buyers going after it, but all the multifamily guys are going after it too. So that makes it really tough. What we found last year that worked really well for us is just distress lists. And, one of our best performing lists historically has been the tax delinquent lists. So, we get at the local government level, people are facing taxes. The one thing is whether the interest rates are high or low, it is always distress. So if you can get lists that are distressed, those are the people who are going to be more motivated to sell at a discount because, as we talked about earlier, they have a problem. And that problem requires the value and the solution that you can bring to the table. And those are the people we're looking for. And the more you can reach those and the more value you can provide, the greater success you'll have.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like 110%, because I'm glad you added all that because I was gonna say the top level demographic list, what we do is create those and then we buy all of it.
Yeah.
Like in Indianapolis, there's 450,000 homes or whatever in Marion County. And once we started buying it, we end up owning like 150,000 names.
Yeah.
Which is just a big majority of the houses, right? So we own all the absentee, we own all the age equity. And then this is what I was going to tell you is we don't dare mail to those people direct, just barely, like just out of the gate and just mail to them. We take those lists and then we do what you do, but pull the distress lists. And this is some deep shit, but like as a business owner, there's really complex things you have to figure out.
Sure.
But PLM, the property list manager, is a good one. I think batch, you
Yep.
may know some too, but if you get a list stacker, if you're good at Excel, you can just do it yourself. You just dump the lists in and you compare two columns. But what we're looking for is to say, hey, I want to dump my list in somewhere and compare them. And I want to say who's on the aged equity list, who's also on the tax delinquent. And so our most effective is typically I don't even want to go into this whole rabbit hole tonight. We literally have 15 demographic
Yeah.
things that we pull, and we have 30 distress lists.
Right.
There's literally 45 points of data being used to buy different lists and dump them all into the same place. And then we're only mailing to people who are on 4 of the points at minimum. If you're not on 2 or 3 distress lists and you're not old and lived in your house, or you're not absent, you're not getting a mailer from us.
Yeah.
I
That's
know
awesome.
that's so advanced, dude, but
Yeah.
that and or being really good at finding the legitimate buyers. And if you got to stomach this one because if you think you found a buyer and they're just giving you a wild goose chase, you're wasting your money. But once you know, when you're good enough to know I've got real buyers who I can count on,
Yeah.
you know what they're buying, you go buy the list of those houses. If they want nothing under 1,000 square feet, minimum 3 beds, has to have a second bathroom and has to have a garage and can't be on a basement and whatever, you can literally go buy exactly what these real buyers, and you only usually have a few of these buyers, like 3 to 5 probably. But once you get rolling, this is where direct mail really becomes where you can do these layers and stacking. It's called data stacking, list stacking, if you guys want to look it up. But also the most money we've ever made is when we catch a falling star. We find some buyers who are like, they got to spend their money. And we just go buy the list for them, basically.
Yeah. Right.
And we call people.
Become the deal finder for them. Now that's for you guys that are wholesaling. So Mike, I know you're looking to buy houses to flip, and there's a few other people in here. You're looking for houses for yourself. So it really, you have to kind of determine what kind of project you're looking for, what kind of house you're looking for, right? And then, you kind of back it from there. Now, all the lists work. Some are going to work better than others. If you're new in this business, I would keep it super simple. Just pull an absentee list, pull a owner equity list, right? A senior owner equity list, pull a distress list from tax delinquent, But as Steve was saying about all these different fields of stacking, like as you grow your business and get more advanced, like these are the things that you're working towards, right? So you start simple, you just pull a list, send some mailings, you just start getting some deals. But as time goes on, the reason why Steve is so successful is because he's constantly just turned the dial of little improvements over time. And he's been able to create this amazing marketing channel where he's doing way more deals than probably anybody else in his market because he's understood it. So, don't just think, hey, I'm doing my list, I'm getting some deals, that's good. Make sure that you guys are progressing this way. There's no hurry. You don't have to hurry up and get there. But eventually you want to be in a situation where you start stacking or having a team that can understand this for you. That's why you want to track your KPIs and keep track of all your data and let the history show you what you need to do.
100%. Here's another complex, but or hard, but not complex thing to your point. When you guys are going to direct mail, if you're doing it, you should consider skip tracing your mailing list.
Yes.
And you also want to do the NCOA, the National Change of Address. So you don't buy old lists and then you pay to send a bunch of mail and it comes back to you. You also want the return mail to come to you.
Yep.
Because when a mailer comes to you as undeliverable because they don't live there anymore, that means they're not getting mail from anybody.
Right.
And by the way, if you're like, well, everybody's sending mail, every time I go to a house, they got 20 postcards. Well, don't let yourself eat that bullshit sandwich because the only reason anyone's mailing is because it works.
Yeah.
It's proof of concept.
Sure.
So, when IKEA, one of the things in the city I'm in the suburb I'm in, IKEA came to town and we helped do that through our I'm on a couple of boards. And so it was interesting because there was this debate and everyone's like, oh, they're going to crush, people came in to bitch, like they're going to crush the local furniture companies. And so the research was really interesting to me. That literally when IKEA comes into town, they spend so much money on marketing and they create so much awareness because people drive in regionally, right, to go to an IKEA.
Sure.
Many of you have probably driven somewhere to another city, or if you're going somewhere and you find out they have an IKEA, you go there while you're there because they don't have them everywhere. They, on average, raise the entire furniture sales, the GDP of furniture sales in a city when it comes in by 40%.
Wow.
And not only that, Bob's Discount Furniture and all these other people follow them into every market because they spend millions of dollars knowing where to go. And when they go there, it's a good idea to be there. And all these other people follow them. Everybody makes more money because there's just more awareness because there's actually a market for it. And so honestly, the more people are mailing, the more that it's probably because everybody else is doing the research
You're
and
in a good area.
and it makes sense and you're in a good area. So that's actually an indicator you're doing the right thing. And when you're in the house, that means they've talked to 10 other people who are probably not really good at this because most people suck at wholesaling or buying houses. And if you can become decent to great, you're going to crush people. And actually, I'm glad when they've talked to 8 other people when I walk in there
We are too. Funny you should say that.
because we're going to do a better job.
We are. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because we've been
And
working on it for so long.
so get all the return mail to come to you. What I was going to say is because that means no one is getting mail to that person because they moved and their address is bad. So you want to skip trace it, get their new address and mail it to their new address. Or you just, when you skip trace it, you want to call and text them. And where I was going with all that is if you're going to buy a list and you're going to send mail to it, you might as well skip trace it because it doesn't cost that much more to go ahead and be careful in today's world, but you can text and cold call that as well. And I know there's a lot of compliance and a lot of changes. So only do it if you know what you're doing and you're registered on the 10 DLC, all these things. Like make sure you're doing it legitimately. But if you are registered correctly and you do not violate the do not call, all these things, right? Like if you can do some of these things and get a hold of those people, you can call them and say something like, hey, I sent some mail to the house and you didn't call, you never called. I was a little worried. Did you get my mailer? And they're like, what? Especially if they're older, they're like, oh, I'm sorry, honey. Like, I didn't know.
Yeah.
Or you
I
can
love it.
text them and say, hey, we sent you a yellow postcard. Did you get it? Well, I
Yeah.
already know they got one. They probably got 50 of them. But like, there's some continuity that you can create where you can start to dominate a list. And so this is a whole nother Zoom that Jeremy and I can do. But so when we start to become more omnipresent, if I'm texting, calling, and mailing you, by the way, you can buy IP addresses. So you can run banner ads on their computer if on the same addresses if you want. So they're like, they're on CNN and boom, like Jeremy buys houses pops up on there or whatever. But
You
also
already do that. Don't tell them.
but also once you've done that, and they become a lead, now you can start doing follow-up with them, and which is really, really important. So checking back in with them and following up. And so a good follow-up system combined with a multi-presence when you're picking certain areas and you're mailing and doing different things, and you might put bandit signs up if you want to do that or whatever. There's different ways to farm an area with different marketing channels, right? And then when they call you, if you guys get their emails, once you get enough email, you can create a custom list on social media with Meta, and you can run ads to people whose cell phone and email that you have. So once they called you, you might end up having hundreds and later thousands of people who were past leads that didn't work out. You can actually much more cheaply run social media ads, and the only people that see it are the ones that are on your list. Again, I know this is advanced stuff for a lot of you guys, but I want you to start thinking this way. And like Jeremy said, if you got $5,000, the best thing's probably pull an absentee homeowner and make sure they've owned it for at least 2 years because they're more likely to sell if they've owned it for a couple years. And just send them a postcard and start getting black eyes on the phone.
Yep.
Start getting beat up on the phone.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's a good segue. So, you talked about texting and cold calling. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are because that's what a lot of people have had a lot of success for the last handful of years, we've seen a rise of wholesalers and, people going direct to seller, more than ever. It's been very trendy, but a lot of it has been on the coattails of texting and cold calling.
Yep.
How do you feel about those marketing channels now?
Definitely harder. After watching one of my really good friends lose a class action lawsuit from texting and have out loud in court, when they say, oh, you could go to jail for 20 years, but you're probably going to just get probation, but they tell you the maximum potential sentence. There was in the several nine figures.
Wow.
Hundreds of millions, because they had been sending 10,000 texts a week for 4 years, and it was like 150 or 1,500 an infraction or something. Like, the math was like insane. Astronomical.
Yeah.
Like astronomical math. And that's what they do, because after that they're like, but we wouldn't do that to you because we know you can't afford that. We'll happily settle for 2.5 million.
Yeah.
And so their legal bill, they had to shut off their marketing for months. They're having like $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 months in their business, and they had to stop that for a couple months. Now they've lost their biggest marketing channel, which was text. They had to commit to never doing it again, not doing it anymore. Like, there's real, that's not likely to happen to most of you guys, but getting some a-hole who files a complaint and then they hold you hostage and they send you that dumb letter that everybody gets that says, if you pay me $1,500, I'll go away. Like, you will get those if you just do too much of it, or pay me $5,000, I won't sue you. There's a whole racket out there that you can run into.
Yeah.
So what I suggest with all of it is, it's hard because it really drops your list way down, but you do need to scrub them correctly. What's as or even more important than scrubbing the do not call list is the litigator list. And just ask any list provider you talk to scrub it against litigators. That is phone numbers that are associated with people who have filed lawsuits. They're known ambulance chasers.
Wow. I didn't know that one.
That's great. And so getting them off the list is more important than do not call. Yeah. Now, I'm not telling you to call people on the do not call. But I'm telling you that if you have a process for moving people off the do not call and you get, violated and someone calls you, all you have to do is prove that you have a way to track it. And when they complain, you never call them again. Now, if they can prove you kept calling them after they asked to be removed, you will get in potential trouble and it'll cost you some money. So what I found to be the best with cold calling is to hire like Lamasu. Good friends with Scott Morse.
Yeah.
I'm not repping their business at all, but I'm just saying he's definitely the top dog in the business. But I would hire a legitimate cold calling vendor and let them take all the liability for doing all the calling.
Yeah, I agree.
It's more expensive, but it just removes the whole issue of you being the one making outbound calls.
Yep, you're putting a third party in between you and that person. I will say, in 2019, texting was our biggest source of ROI as far as a marketing channel. I mean, we're crushing it. I love texting, but we do not use it as an outbound marketing channel anymore. We stopped it last year, even before all this stuff, and this just kind of put the nail in the coffin for us. I will say that we do text and we do ringless voicemail and we cold call people in our database that we've already talked to, but we do not do any direct outbound marketing via these channels anymore. Now, I know some of you guys, you're still cold calling. I think that's okay. I think as long as you're scrubbing the list, like Steve said, you'd be okay. I think it gets really crazy when you start, and we've seen Lead Sherpa launch all these companies that we use over the years. They really have gone out of business overnight. I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember the last time I got an unsolicited text on my cell phone. It like never even happens anymore. So, I know sometimes we can text people that we're calling from our own cell and it works, but to send out mass text anymore, it doesn't work. And I think we're transitioning to a period where you need to start thinking about other marketing channels, so if you've been texting and cold calling, you still may have some success that way, but I think it's going to get harder and harder. And I agree with Steve. You hire a third party that can handle that for you, take away all that litigation. But I think you're going to have to realize that if you want to be successful acquiring off-market properties, you got to get away from just the hustler mentality of just texting and cold calling, and realize you're going to have to get a professional marketing channel in place. And there's probably going to be some costs associated with that, but that's probably going to be the way to get a lot of success. So I personally feel over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to see a lot of people leave this industry because they're not willing to spend the money in marketing.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, there's no logins knocking on doors. And when you get really motivated lists,
It works.
it works knocking on doors. It's rough business though. But like, doing that's not going to go away. Doing direct mail is not going to go away, but knocking on doors is a lot cheaper if you can get a list. Now, honestly, if you scout, so I know we're running short on time. Can I shotgun a couple things really quick for everybody?
Let's do it.
So this is another thing. You guys should be scouring the MLS, and any house that's been sitting for 60 to 90 days, if it works, especially if it looks a little bit distressed, you can just contact the realtor and be like, look, I don't want to waste your time. I'm not going to submit a lowball offer that wastes your time, but I want you to know that I buy houses and I'm serious. And that if this seller is willing to take if they're willing to entertain an offer that's significantly below listing price, I'm willing to put a legitimate offer together. That really does work.
Yeah.
If houses are sitting, realtors can get shit done. And many times they're not supposed to do this because they have a fiduciary responsibility, but they'll be like, yes, please, like make any offer. I know they're willing to look at it. And so scouring the MLS for stale listings is good. Door knocking any motivated list you have, especially foreclosure and tax sale, is maybe it's not safe unless you carry a gun, but it's not going to get you a class action lawsuit like texting or cold calling, right? You already said it, but one of the most powerful things you can be doing is texting and calling, blowing up with text and calling all your old clients. And you can do it very differently. It's more like, hey, it's Jeremy. Do you remember me?
Yes.
Or I was at the house. And like, it's not like, hey, do you still own property located at, like you say some broken English, like whatever. And so working old leads, you still can use those other marketing channels. And so the other big one, you got to be careful with this, but if you can link up with wholesalers that have legitimate deals, you just got to make sure they actually have the deal on contract and you're not getting too deep into a daisy chain. But if you trust that they actually own the contract, you don't really have to mess with that part, and you can just get good at bringing buyers to the table. And if you had to pick one or the other, it's way easier to find buyers because they're way more interested. And I wanted to spend 2 minutes on that before I can stay a little longer, but I just want to say a couple things because we didn't talk about Dispo much. But spending time getting to know buyers is a lot easier than trying to do all these marketing channels to find sellers. Now, you need to do all of it if you want to run a real business. But in the beginning, if you're short on money and you're trying to figure things out, what you need to do is get yourself in the middle of deal flow. You just need to get in the middle of deal flow. And if deal flow is already rolling with realtors and other wholesalers in town who are legit and cool, they'll always be willing to talk to you. Especially if you're like, I got buyers with proof of funds that are legit. Now, I was going to give them like just 3 or 4 little quick like literally a 2 to 3 minute little diatribe on dispositions to help them with wholesaling.
Yeah, please.
But before I do that, I want to give you a floor back on marketing. I know I just wanted to rattle some marketing off that shouldn't be expensive, that anybody can do, scouring the MLS, calling your old leads, door knocking, right? JVs, like there's ways to get yourself into deal flow without having to do all the expensive stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Networking in your local REITs, getting to connect with those people, definitely bet the people JV to make sure it is not a daisy chain, because that stuff is happening to an abundance out there. Outbound marketing channels like your texting, cold calling, mailing, all those things, those are going to be cold. Those are cold leads, right? So it's definitely a numbers game then, right? So you're going to spend a lot of time sifting through people after people after people. You're going to have a lower conversion there, right? But these are usually the marketing channels you begin with. So these are the ones I would recommend as you're a newbie to learn your bumps and bruises and black eyes. But as you get more seasoned, you can start building inbound marketing channels that they convert better, usually have a better motivation. but they're more expensive. We talked about PPC and SEO already. Steve touched on social media marketing as well. That is a good one. There is radio. There's TV. There's direct TV streaming, right? So there's a handful of others. There's geo fencing, like you said. Another one is building relationships with probate attorneys. I see we have Cam Adesanya on here. He's like the probate guy here in Massachusetts. Building relationships with probate attorneys, and that is a great opportunity to get deals at a low cost if you can be the go-to person. So there's some other marketing channels out there. There's many of them. They all work, but converting of them is the hardest part. But I think what Steve said the most about texting and cold calls, guys, just be careful. Just be careful. People are getting fined. It's really happening. It may not happen to you, but if it does, it could be detrimental.
Yep. That's good, dude. I know we didn't
Steve,
spend a lot of time on Dispo.
I think we do Dispo another time because there's so much more. We'd be here for like another hour. I thought we'd get it both done in one show, one masterclass, but I think Dispo deserves a lot of time itself. But I'd love to open it up to Q&A. We've had a couple guys, or Mike really asked us some questions. Guys, I know you guys are doing some deals. I see some of my students on here. I see some of you guys that are in the Facebook group and everything else, and they were friends. Like, guys, ask some questions. How can we help you get more deals with your marketing right now? Raise your hands. Let's ask in the chats, please.
While you guys are putting stuff put in the Q&A if you can. There we go. Would it make sense to skip trace a stacked list to get phone and email, then mail them and market to them via a custom list on social media? Yeah, just realize, if you're that ready for that,
Brendan.
Brent, okay.
Yeah.
Brendan. I just want to make sure I said that. Oh yeah, Brendan. I think, okay. Anyway, yes, that makes sense. Just realize this. If you take a list and you skip trace it and then you mail everybody, it's actually a lot cheaper if you're 10 DLC registered and whatever, you're all legit for texting. You could actually text through and get all the people who like middle finger you and tell you to suck it. You can actually get them off the list a lot. It's a lot cheaper. They tell you, lose my number, kill yourself, all that kind of stuff. You actually clear through a lot of the people that call and bitch from the mailer, and then you won't mail anyone who's already asked to be off the list. So I would just consider timing, and obviously make sure when anyone calls you, even if they're not ready to go now, you got to get their cell phone and their email so you can make that custom list for social media. So you always just want to say, hey, while we're talking here, one of the things I want to do is make sure I get a whole hot file in the system. What's a good email for you? What's your cell phone? Make sure you collect that so you have it. And then think about which ones are first. Like mailing a list first is just the most expensive way to touch base with it. So if you can do an inexpensive way to clear out all the hate and bad phone numbers and everything, that'll be good.
Yeah, I love that. And Daniel Wright, my man, I'm glad you're here tonight. Big fan of Daniel. That guy's going to be doing some amazing things. If you guys don't know who Daniel Wright is, you need to check out him. That guy is doing some great stuff down south. He's the real deal. Any more questions, anybody? What do we got here? Oh, we got Lisa and John. What is the best way to do a long-term follow-up when the seller is not initially ready to sell, but you want to keep them warm and top of mind when they are ready? Great question.
You want me to hit it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I called a hook. So he's looking for a hook, which is the reason to call back. And so when you identify that they're not really ready now, you want to ask, like, why? And you want to understand. And sometimes they won't just tell you exactly, but they might be like, look, we're really waiting until May when my kid graduates from college to see where, if they get a job, they're thinking about moving, we might move or whatever, right? There's always a story. And so the way to start the best follow-up is to have a really good sales call and really build rapport and get an honest explanation of their situation, which is the best way to actually know when to go in for the kill for the sale now, but it's also sets you up for the best follow-up. So it gives you the best shot of getting deals now, but it also sets you up because you actually know them well enough. When you call them back, they're like, oh yeah, Steve, man, I remember you. So building rapport on the initial call is really good, but you want to set a hook which is just understanding, like if they say my kid graduates in May, or or I'm retiring in October, or we're taking this bit, call me back after, whatever it is, you want to make a note in the CRM on the hook. So when you call back, you want to be memorable, obviously, but secondly, you want to use that hook to be like, hey, I was calling back to touch base to see how things are going with the house. And so quite simply, the easiest follow-up call ever doesn't need to be super sneaky. It starts something like this. Hey, I don't know if you remember me. I was calling to see if you still own the house at whatever. I didn't say their name. I'm not like, hey, Jeremy, this is Steve Richards calling from Redevelop Indy Home Buyers, and I just wanted to call. They've already hung up. Like literally, it's like a 20-second intro.
That's awesome.
So it's like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I was calling you back. If you say, I don't know if you remember me, I was calling you back in the first couple seconds, they're going to listen to you. And then you say, I was just calling to see if you still own the house at, 123 Main Street. It's such a simple question. They might be like, who are you? But it's okay because now I've interrupted the pattern to where they're waiting. Like, who's calling back, and who wants to know if I remember them, and how do they know my address? And like, I've established that I can start the conversation now. And it's like, listen, I know we talked a while back. I want to see if you still own the house. This is like a little choose your own adventure. But if they say, yeah, it's like, okay, well, what's going on? Did you change your mind about selling it, or where are things going? It's really simple. And if they're like, I don't remember you, and you're like, oh, well, remember we talked and you told me your kid was graduating, and they're like, oh, okay. Right. And so then you go down this whole path. If they're like, no, I sold it, you just want to ask really quickly, like, did you sell it or put it on contract? Is it closed? And if they're like, no, it hasn't closed yet, now you can kind of tear into, well, do you trust them? Has there been an inspection? Do you want a backup offer? You can kind of work it. And if they sold it, you're like, hey, congratulations, how'd you do on it? Sometimes we get some intel. We're like, oh yeah, what'd you get for? It's just nice to know, like you were like, I can't pay more than 100, and someone bought it for 120, and you might be like, shit, I want to make a mental note of going back to that one. But I love these follow-up calls because you can do it yourself easily, or when you hire a new rep, it's the best, easiest thing to do when they're getting going. You can't mess up calling, hey, Jeremy, I was calling to see if you still own the house. Like, that is the easiest call to make and ask if they still own the house. And remember what I said, the best way to start a follow-up campaign is to build really good rapport, get a hook, put that in the CRM. And then when you call back, the other little trick is, and then I'll move off this question, is we create a custom field in our database. This is for the advanced folks. This is why I don't work with newbies, Jeremy. I can't even fucking help myself to like talk about complex shit. But we always have a field called last followed update. It's a custom field we add to our database, and we track the last time we had a valid, not like I called and they're like, call me back, but the last time I had an actual conversation with that person, we track that. And so being able to track when you recently, you can also do it through looking at notes.
Yeah.
But if you use a date field, you can sort by, who haven't we talked to in 3 months? So being organized with who and when to call is really important for a follow-up campaign as well. All right.
Love that. Asai knows that one. So this guy is asking, or this person, I'm thinking of outsourcing my cold calling PPC part since it's much less expensive. Is it worth it risk wise? So I personally think you should outsource everything as much as possible, because your job should be talking to sellers, going on appointments, landing contracts, and making money. I would definitely not be building your own PPC. And if you are at a point where you don't need to cold call, you start making money, then I would definitely try to outsource that as quickly as possible. And then obviously, as Steve mentioned earlier, from a litigation standpoint, from cold calling, it totally makes sense. But again, unless you're an experienced person, I would not be doing PPC unless you're doing, like, you have a track record of doing deals consistently. I would not do PPC. It's very, very expensive.
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly. I fully agree with hiring third parties. Just don't get sold the BS sales line from a vendor. I would always vet every vendor. Number one, how long have you been doing it? How many current clients? Hey, which out of your best clients, what do they have in common that makes them successful? Out of your clients that don't do well, what do they have in common that makes them fail? It's always, they don't use our shit, or they don't, it's always you, not you. That's what they always say. But anyway, you want to fully vet them. And then secondly, this is even more important. Once you vet them, like you want to talk to some of their other clients, you really make sure that these people have been doing this for a while and you can trust them. But secondly, don't think there's any set it and forget it vendor. Every 2 to 4 weeks, I'd be having a call with that vendor and I'd be like, hey, what are you seeing? How's our account look to your other compared to your other clients? Is there any new promotions or do you have any new services I need to hear about? Here's my statistics. Like have an open dialogue at least monthly, if not more often, to say, look, this is what how many leads you get sold me, or this is what's going on, or you just, it's insane how many things don't get set up, especially in the first month where they're like, if they're a cold call vendor, maybe there's something with a call rail number or whatever for callbacks. And like, you'll find out that number's not actually ringing to anybody, or you just, or their live transfers getting sent to a number that you don't use anymore. Right. Like there's so much screwing around with making sure that it's actually flowing in the beginning and then stay on top of it. Even when it's crushing, if it's killing it, talk to them. Even if the monthly call is like, hey man, bro, those leads are killing it. And they're like, yeah, thanks. Would you do a testimonial? And you're like, awesome. Yes, I'll be on your podcast. And then hang up. It's okay. Just don't stop touching base at least monthly with every vendor. Vet them hard in the beginning, manage them really well during the process, and don't ever quit them if you're pissed without asking for freebies. Like on the way out the door and you think, well, I can't afford to pay them anymore. Well, because if it's not working, call them and tell them, I've been paying you for 6 months. It's not working. I need you to help me here. Like, you can almost always negotiate a better deal because once you've been a client for more than a few months, they do not want to lose you.
Correct.
They hate losing clients. They'll always give you a deal on the back end before you leave.
And I will say everything that Steve just told you is something that he's coached me personally and that we have gone through with our vendors. We meet all of our vendors on a monthly basis, talk to them, make sure we're on the right path, and we review numbers and KPIs and expectations and problems. Communication, right? We want to have great communication with our vendors, but there's been times where they have not performed well. Even some of our vendors we've used for years, we just left a vendor after 5 years because they weren't performing. And we did get some freebies, and it was a little bit of a battle. But everything he just said is what we just learned. I've learned in the past year on my personal coaching calls with Steve that we had to implement. So I love all that. Do we have any more questions up here? It looks like we got another one.
Yeah, Daniel asked about Investor Lift.
Yeah, I know that's a new thing. I do not use Investor Lift. I've had people call me because of it. But I really have no experience there. I still build my cash buyers list the old fashioned way. And honestly, the way I run my businesses, we leverage the MLS a lot. So we don't really need it.
Daniel specifically, what's up, by the way? He and I had a long call there today.
Yeah, he's great.
He did the team architects assessment, and
good. You listen.
It's always eye opening.
Thank you.
It was good, but for you guys considering Investor Lift, I would go more top rate with it if you're going to. It's kind of weird. Like sometimes it's been broken and people are paying the lower rate, but they're getting God mode or whatever they call it, where you can get all the info. It can definitely be beneficial, but it doesn't completely eliminate the need for being good at selling. It will get you on the phone with people and get you interest, but it does create a lot of tire kicking. But you still need to be able to like have the right house on contract and talk to people and negotiate and do everything, right? So it's not a silver bullet where they might sell it like, oh, you just put your deal on the platform, send it out, and your people will call you and buy your house. It can help, but I'll tell you, even though it's more work, if you can really study on the MLS, watch the last 30 to 60 days of houses that have closed where the cash was the means of closing. It says in there, sometimes you got to get a realtor involved to help you. I literally believe you are shooting yourself in the foot if you don't get access through a realtor, if you're not one, to your local data and find out the cash sales that have happened in the last 30 to 60 days and call those agents, because they are the ones that are working with the cash buyers, and the best cash buyer list is always the MLS.
Agreed.
It's the biggest buyers list that exists. It's bigger than Investor Lift. It's better than Investor Lift. And secondly, studying, buying the, cash transactions that are more than 60 days out. So the older transactions, when you buy the data and looking at those buyers and finding a way, whether it's skip tracing or whatever, direct mail is probably the best way to reach out to them. Where you send them a letter and just say, look, I saw that you bought, and I'd look at anyone that bought more than 5 houses in the last like 3 to 6 months. I would send them a letter and be like, look, I saw you're buying a lot of property in local records. I have that data because I'm an investor. I buy a lot of data because I work with sellers and I get contracts and I wholesale. I provide, I can bring deals to someone like yourself. So if you have an interest in working with us, give me a phone call. And leave your phone number in it. So sending mail like that to anyone who's bought more than 5 houses in the last, 3 to 6 months is good. And then calling realtors who've been representing more than one. I wouldn't do one transaction. If they just did one cash transaction,
Right. It'd just
I'd
be
pull
a
the
residential
list.
sale.
Yeah, I'd be looking for anyone that did more than 2 or 3 in the last 30 to 60 days. It's very important because it means right now they got buyers buying. Like that is always going to be your fastest because they know how to do a deal. They know how to pull title. They know how to write up a purchase agreement. They know how to get proof of funds. Like they're already so easy to work with. And you get a hold of an agent who's got a live buyer with cash. They're like, bro, bring me deals because they just see paychecks.
100%.
And they know how to do the whole process and they already have all the contracts.
Yep. And Daniel, you're right. That's why I use the MLS in my business. If you guys go to my YouTube channel, I talk about the power of the MLS. I love the MLS, so that's great. Yeah, you're welcome. We plan on doing these. We've done one a month all year long. I think, Steve, we're going to probably have to do the Dispo one in June. We'll put together a date on that one. We'll probably wrap up here if you guys don't have any questions, but there's something I do want to say before we end this with regards to marketing that you guys, so all marketing channels work, right? But not all marketing channels work equally in all markets. So with that being said, you have to test and retest marketing channels over and over again. And Steve and I agree very passionately about KPIs. You need to be keeping track of your performance of your marketing channels through your key performance indicators, the KPI sheets, right? Data, not drama, because it may feel like something's not working. I ran into this last year after being in business for so long. I was like, I feel like this marketing channel wasn't working. Matter of fact, on my team meeting today, I felt like something wasn't working, but the KPI data will show you the reality. So keep track of everything and be very diligent. I didn't do this for the first couple of years, and we don't make any decisions now without tracking KPIs. And Steve has helped me a lot in the past year with all kinds of KPIs for my business, but it's been like, it's made me tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars getting my KPIs in order. So that's really, really that important. So keep track of your KPIs. And as Steve said earlier, most marketing channels aren't really going to show you how well they work for 90 days, right? So you need to at least keep it going for 90 days. But things like mailing, cold calling, there's probably some other ones in there like ringless voicemail. They may take 6 to 9 months before you really see if that is working. And that's a long time to stay in it, but that's how long you have to be dedicated to really see. So it's easy to be like, oh, I sent out one mailing campaign for 7,000 letters and I only got 10 responses and no deals. I'm out. Well, if you went through that list probably 2, 3, 4 times through texting and mailing it a few more times, you probably would have pulled out like 8 deals out of it. And that $7,000 that you mailed 3 times probably would have made you $100,000. So that's kind of how it works. And you have to really just be consistent with it and know that it takes time, but your KPIs will track everything. So just if you're going to test a marketing channel, test it for 90 days. Mailing, cold calling, 6 to 9 months. And if you don't see good ROI at that point, then try a different one. But if you leave a marketing channel, don't be afraid to come back to it later on and test it again because it may work again. Just my thoughts, Steve, on that.
Yeah, I'll finish up by adding this. I 120% agree with what you said. If you dare to spend money on marketing and not track how much you spent and what happened, you deserve whatever happens to you.
Good point.
You're going to learn either one way or the other. You're going to learn what the data teaches you, or going to learn that you should have tracked the data. It doesn't matter. It's like when
That's
you get into
awesome.
business, everybody doesn't want to spend money with an attorney, but it's fucking guaranteed.
Yeah,
You either do it when you get started or you do it later. And when you do it later, it always costs twice as much. So
yeah.
you can prolong it, like you can prolong tracking data, but in the end, the lesson you'll learn is that you should track the data. Um, it's really interesting. And by the way, two other quick things. Um, just one quick thing on what you said. Just think about cold calling. The people are sitting in front of the TV watching Phil, Dr. Phil.
Yeah.
They got a phone call and you talked them into being like, yeah, maybe I do want to sell my house. And then the next day you call them back and you're like, well, I think I could offer you 110,000. Can you close this month? Like they don't know where they're going to go. Like you got to realize when it's inbound, they're more ready to go.
Right.
But when it's outbound, which is cheaper, it takes a lot longer because they're just, you got to be really ready to help them figure out where they're going to go. And there's a lot to it. So just realize like you get what you pay for with these leads too.
Yep.
And it's not that they're lower quality, but like grabbing someone's attention through cold calling can work, but that's why it takes 6 to 9 months, not because it takes you that long to figure it out, but it's just a slower moving parade. It's like a slower moving to see the action go by. It just takes a while because they got to get primed. So follow up is just key. So when you start direct or start cold calling, the first 90 days of it, a lot of time is just priming the pump
Yeah.
to
Yep.
get it rolling.
Yep.
And were you gonna say something?
No, I'm just agreeing with you. You're absolutely right.
And I'm just gonna add this as my parting comments for all you guys about marketing. All leads suck to some degree,
Yep.
and you are never going to be good enough, or not good enough. That didn't come out right. You're never going to maximize and hit your ceiling on how good you are at beating objections, building rapport, gaining trust, and negotiating price. There's always room for improvement. And in the beginning, there's miles.
Yes.
So if someone calls and says, yeah, listen, I'm only selling my house if you give me X, Y, and Z, but if not, suck it, like appease them and say, well, I don't know if I can pay that much, but let me ask you this. How's the kitchen?
Yeah.
You know, if we did agree on price, when would you want to move? Like just start learning to have these conversations. Like you got to be able to absorb objections and go around, just absorb them and keep going. And there's always, always, always with marketing, the most important thing you can do is get really good at the qualification, like digging into any lead's situation, not their motivation, not their asking price. What is their situation? Because sometimes once you hear their situation, you're like, man, this guy's effed. He's got to sell, but he's pissed because he doesn't want to. Especially when you're older and your kids are telling you got to move because of your health. Like you don't want to move. You're like, man, I'm never selling this house. Like, oh, okay. That's not what you told the cold caller when you had a 17-minute phone conversation with them yesterday, because that was right after you talked to your kids and they told you that you need to pack your shit up and move to Florida with them. Like, so just, I want to make sure I emphasize this, that you can work on all the intricacies of stacking data and blah, 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 all the stuff we said, right? Go out, knock doors and all these things. But just don't ever discount how important it is to manage the leads correctly to get them into the sales process.
Couldn't agree more. And that's a great plug for REI Freedom, because that's what we are passionate about teaching you guys in our coaching program. So if you have more interest, definitely learn there, because the sales skills is where the money's made. This isn't business to business sales, right? We're very niche of what we talk to, who we work with, and what we talk to as far as sellers. They're distressed, they're emotional, they're irrational, they're habitual procrastinators, right? They're going through a lot of distress. These are different types of situations that you have to get very good at. So the reason why Dan Toback can be really good is because he has 10 years of being coached and experience in this field, right? Steve is great because he's been doing this for 20 years. My guy, Eddie DiLorenzo, the Godfather, he's fantastic because he's got 5 years of experience, but I've been coaching him and getting him coaching for 5 years. So although we teach you high level sales skills, how to, take these leads and convert them to deals and revenue, you got to understand this is something you have to continuously learn and get better at. You could take a year of our coaching program, you're going to get awesome at doing the deals better than you were before. but you're going to even get better after a second year and a third year and a fourth year. It's just like anything else, guys. You practice, you implement, you learn, you practice, you implement, right? So that's what it takes. Stack all the lists you want, right? I will do, my guys with sales skills will do one list with no stacking and outperform somebody who stacks all the lists and doesn't know how to handle those leads. So invest in getting better at learning how to handle leads, to put those things under contract, because that's where you're going to make the money. You know, Steven's great at everything, but he's mostly great at teaching his team how to take those leads, provide value, and overcome objections, set deadlines, keep them on a short leash on the price negotiation, build rapport, come from a place of empathy, right? All the things that we teach. I know some of our students in here. These are the things that make you all the money in this business. So I just want to really, if you want to learn more, go to reifreedom.com and book a call with me, and we'll talk more about that.